Released by Capcom in the year 2012 on the Nintendo 3DS and later ported to multiple platforms, Resident Evil Revelations was a game that focused more on the series' roots of survival horror versus survival action, after criticism that Resident Evil 5 and Operation Raccoon City strayed too far into action. Directed by Koshi Nakanishi, who also directed Resident Evil 7, and written by Daikoto, who helped write anime series Cowboy Bebop and Ghost in the Shell, the game was slower paced, emphasizing exploration in a claustrophobic environment reminiscent of classic mansion settings. For gameplay, the game is third person with the character more in frame but slightly off center, allowing more visibility in a more closed environment. In many ways, it's closer to the first Resident Evil, by means of solving puzzles, gaining keys to gradually unlock new areas, managing a limited inventory of health items, ammo, and weapons with access to safe room item boxes, and interpreting health with visual cues instead of a set health bar. But it blends elements of the more action-leaning Resident Evils, with weapon upgrading, precision aiming, being able to move while shooting, and the dodge and quick-turn maneuvers. Unique here, weapons were upgraded with collectible and interchangeable modification parts, allowing the player to truly customize their personal loadout. For story, the game features the return of series originals Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, though there are several short segments where the player will play as one of the supporting characters. A new virus and enemy type called the Ooze premiere here, and each have multiple means of attack and the ability to even appear before or behind the player by traveling through vents and grates, adding an element of surprise randomization and pressure. Introduced was a new minigame mode called Raid Mode, in which, similar to Resident Evil 3's Mercenaries mode, the goal is to reach the end of a scenario and level while also beating as many foes as possible. Keep in mind, the actual game tells its story in episodes not necessarily in chronological order, but for this recap I will be presenting the events in chronological order. The story only gets larger from here, so let's cut it down to size with a recapitation. In 2004, shortly after the fall of Umbrella, Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine helped co-found the BioTerrorism Security Assessment Alliance, or the BSAA for short. Despite Umbrella being shut down, many of the BOWs they created and sold in black markets were still around and ironically more of a threat now that Umbrella wasn't trying to regulate their distribution and cover them up. Backed by the United Nations, their mission is to investigate and eliminate bioterrorism around the world. At this time, we are introduced to Terra Grigia, an artificial floating city in the Mediterranean Sea that is energy independent thanks to its advanced solar energy matrix. Later in 2004, Veltro, a terrorist group opposing the construction of the Aquapolis, unleashed a virus in the city and several bioweapons to enact one of the worst global tragedies seen in years. The United States-based FBC, the then current leader in counter-bioterrorism, was called in to contain the outbreak, though refused to work with any other group other than the UN-backed BSAA, whom they only allowed in as an observer. Acting quickly, the leader of the FBC, Morgan Lansdale, made the controversial decision to turn the city's solar matrix unto itself and vaporize the city, marking the incident to be referred to as a Terra Grigia panic. Afterwards, the FBC claimed victory in disbanding Veltro, and a year later the remnants of the city still stand as a reminder to the threat of bioterrorism. During the outbreak, however, we see FBC agents Parker and Jessica despair as the city is overrun. As they escape, they note an attack of this scale is exactly what Lansdale was warning about when he asked for more resources for the FBC. They find a wounded cadet named Raymond and save his life as they treat him and move him with safety. Raymond questions how such a small group was able to pull off such a professionally done job with large amounts of BOWs without the FBC noticing, and openly wonders if this was an unstat job. Making it to Lansdale in the command center, Lansdale remarks how this is a wake-up call and gives the order for the FBC to evacuate as well. BSAA Director O'Brien now enters, disapproving the hasty move to destroy the entire city, reminding Lansdale that extreme moves like this create extreme groups like Veltro in the first place. Lansdale dismisses him as they all move to escape, and Parker and Jessica clear out the entire lobby full of hunters by themselves en route to their chopper. Along the way, they somewhat agree with O'Brien that the FBC mishandled this outbreak, relating the disaster to Raccoon City. As they make it to the chopper and escape, they watch in horror as the Regia Solis power grid is turned up to incinerate everything. As the year passes and it's 2005, 1 year after Terra Grigia and the events of Resident Evil 4, there are suddenly reports of a number of strange carcasses washing up on the shores outside where Terra Grigia stood. The BSAA move in to investigate, and in one of the bodies, agents Parker and Jill find a strange vial. The head of the BSAA, O'Brien, is on site and gets a call that agents Chris Redfield and Jessica have gone missing over the ocean, even though they were in the mountains investigating a lead on the remnants of Veltro. Put on the search and rescue case, Jill and Parker hurry out as they board the storm-tossed luxury liner the Queen Zenobia, after Chris and Jessica disappeared over an hour and a half ago at these coordinates. They see it's been abandoned for some time, and after they spot a strange creature, they discover a corpse with a bizarre new mutation. Spotting something in a floor grate, Jill IDs the object as a gun thanks to her new bioscanning tool, the Genesis. Lifting it out, she's thankful the gun and hand gripping it don't belong to Chris, but a new monster she's never seen before called the Ooze creeps up behind her and attacks. As they kill it, it opens up more questions about what actually happened to the missing crew, or Chris and Jessica. Searching, she soon finds a locked door that within contains a bound man matching Chris's physique. Calling out but getting no response, Jill hurries to find a key to open his cell door, now hearing a scream from a woman as she sees someone get their head smashed against a glass window. She's too late to rescue the mystery woman from the BOWs, but Jill suspects she wasn't part of the crew and instead from some other organization. Finding a key and returning to Chris's cell, she rushes in, only to find this was a decoy dummy, and Parker is dismayed to find the flag of Veltro in the same room. Realizing too late this is all a trap, they're gassed as a masked man enters, addressing Jill directly by name and explaining to her it's time for her to learn the truth. At the same time, Chris and Jessica are actually still in the mountains of Europe, though they can't make contact with HQ on their search for a suspected Veltro base. They're surprised to find a plane suddenly come crashing down nearby, but checking on the crash site, its presence here means there is an airbase nearby as suspected. They find and put down infected wolves that have escaped out of the crash site, confirming the plane to have belonged to Veltro, and along the way, Jessica asks a few questions about Chris's relationship to Jill, asking how she compares to her. Staying focused on the job, they find the airbase where Veltro is hiding out, and suddenly their radios work again. They're hailed by O'Brien, who realizes he's fallen for a trap as he's sent out Jill and Parker on a mission based on faulty intel, and now he's lost contact with them. Betting this is all due to Veltro's resurrection, Chris now hurries to rescue Jill and heads to the Mediterranean. Back with Jill, she wakes up in a bedroom elsewhere on the ship, but without her weapons. Dodging enemies until she and Parker re-equip, they avoid new variations of the ooze and make their way to the bridge, only to find the controls smashed and the ship is adrift. To make matters worse, they see their tugboat explode, and suddenly Jill is grabbed by a mysterious man. She escapes his hold, though when Parker confronts him, he pauses as the man calls him out by name, and he recognizes him as Raymond from the FBC. Parker fires off a warning shot alongside a few more questions, but Raymond refuses to answer anything, only mocking them that they don't even know why they're here or whom they're fighting, and leaves. Admitting he's right, Parker and Jill resolve to search the ship for answers, and find the communication room so they can contact HQ. Waiting for some doors to take a rather long time to open, they move to the more luxurious parts of the cruise ship. Haunted by the wails of someone crying Mayday in the promenade, they are ambushed by the bloated, mutated body of the former comms officer, who lunges at them with his bizarre chainsaw arm. Staying calm and killing the monster, they reach the communication room and find Raymond there, who's also stuck as someone else already beat him here and destroyed most of the equipment. Their attention is drawn to the screen where a live broadcast is being shown, wherein a masked man of Veltro is quoting the Divine Comedy as he introduces the T-Abyss virus, a combination of the new Abyss virus discovered through deep-sea exploration and combined with the T-virus to easily infect almost any organism. Showing its rapid infection process, they threaten to contaminate 1/5 of the world's oceans with their sample. As the masked man reveals himself to be Jack Norman, the leader of the original Veltro, Chris asks O'Brien to look for clues in the airbase they saw as he moves towards Jill. O'Brien agrees and sends agents Quint and Keith in to investigate. Meanwhile, Parker and Raymond are mad to see the return of Veltro and another biohazard, and while they can still work the communication equipment a little, it needs more power, so they must turn on the main engine room of the ship. Raymond gives them a key to access further parts of the ship and asks if they saw his FBC partner, Rachel, who went missing some time ago on the ship. Passing through a casino, Jill believes the woman she saw get killed earlier might have been Rachel, who likely has the elevator key they need to proceed. Returning to where she last found her, she finds the body is mysteriously gone and only Rachel's journal remains. But looking up, it's apparent Rachel has mutated dangerously under the T-Abyss virus. Chasing her down and gunning down her powerful mutation, they stun her long enough to get the key she had and continue onward. Entering the bilge, they find it flooded, but the bulkheads can't be lowered until the main power is restored as well. Entering the deep waters filled with sea creepers, which are what the majority of infected female humans turn into, they restore the power in the ship, but suddenly they're locked in the engine room and it begins flooding. Back with Quint and Keith, they arrive at the Veltro base and find footage that they attempted to leave after some BOWs escaped and caused a panic, including one that can cloak itself. Finding a key that can unlock a terminal for the crash site, they approach the plane only to find a new variant hunter model called the Farfarello, developed by Veltro and the T-Abyss virus that can indeed cloak itself almost perfectly. Dealing with them and searching, they find the location of the ship almost too easily, and while they forward the coordinates to Chris, Quint doesn't feel confident in the intel laid out so easily for them to find. Chris and Jessica land on the ship at the given coordinates, and he's ready to search every room for Jill and crush any T-Abyss monsters in his way. As they storm to the flooded engine room, they enter only to find it's completely empty and bare, and Jill and Parker are nowhere in sight. They now see the ship is actually the Queen Semiramis, an identical sister ship to the Queen Zenobia, and they now move out to continue their search in the nearby area. Meanwhile, Jill manages to free herself from the flooded room, and as the power is back on, they then close the bulkheads to stop the flooding. They still have no signal despite the power being on, so they now move to the observation deck to fix the antenna array. Defeating a giant humanoid shellfish called the Draginazo, they restore the communication array and are finally able to reach HQ. O'Brien is relieved to hear from them and knows this is all a setup. Parker asks how he knows it's specifically a setup, but O'Brien is interrupted as he receives word that the Regia Solis satellite is being activated and moves to the Queen of Zenobia's location. He says Chris is on his way but won't make it in time, and while Jill is relieved to hear Chris is safe, she and Parker are on their own. Quint calls in, explaining they can confuse the satellite targeting system using the UAV drone on the ship that Veltro used to carry out their attacks on Terra Grigia, to instead discharge chaff and throw off the satellite. Moving to the foredeck and escaping past the resurrected Rachel with a horde of hunters, they assemble and prime the UAV, while at the same time O'Brien confronts Lansdale on his usage of the Regia Solis again. They send off the UAV with seconds to spare, and it succeeds in fooling the satellite, but the ensuing wave begins sinking the ship. As Jill and Parker swim out of the sinking ship, Chris and Jessica are on their way, telling them to meet up at the ship's hull. However, they are attacked by monstrously large parasitic worms and fend them off as they approach and board the ship. Within, Jill and Parker are halted by another masked man, who shares with them the secrets he knows about the Queen Zenobia. He says the fact that the Queen Zenobia has been undetected until recently, the abrupt disappearance of Veltro after the Terra Grigia panic, and the usage of the Regia Solis now are all connected and point to an inconvenient truth. Right before he reveals it, he's suddenly shot by Jessica, who arrives on scene with Chris, and as Parker hurries to rescue the man, it's revealed to be Raymond under the mask. Parker asks why he pretended to be Veltro, and Raymond whispers something to him before collapsing. As the ship shudders, Jill reminds them all they cannot let it contaminate the sea, and Parker offers to slow the ship sinking with Jessica, while Jill and Chris find the ship's lab and deal with the virus. Jessica laments how Chris never fell for her flirtatious advances, and Parker points out he may already be taken. Reunited at last, Chris and Jill enter the mostly untouched lab on the ship and deal with a pair of Scarmiglione, T-Abyss mutants based on a shark. Finding the secret of Zenobia, which is that the T-Abyss research lab was hidden in a normal cruise ship, we cut to Quint and Keith, who are still harvesting information on Veltro and find evidence linking the FBC to this Veltro site. After further investigation, he finds Veltro was actually never back in action, and it was in fact Director O'Brien who was staging a revival of Veltro, just to trick the BSAA and more importantly, Lansdale the FBC. However, their hacking of the FBC is discovered, and Quint and Keith look up in time to find the FBC had in fact ordered a bombing of the airbase to close up yet another loose end. Over with Parker and Jessica, O'Brien checks in on Parker, verifying that Raymond told him everything, and as a result, Parker knows what to do. Confronting Jessica and calling around as a spy within the BSAA for Lansdale, he's surprised to be joined by Raymond, who points out Jessica is here on the bridge trying to activate the ship's self-destruct mechanism. Parker hesitates, and Jessica takes a shot at Raymond, but Parker jumps in to take the hit. Jessica really does hit the self-destruct button and flees, as Parker urges Raymond to go on after her and collapses. Back with Chris and Jill, they find the motherlode of the virus, but learn a vaccine was also made to neutralize it too. Seeing there is a huge mutated parasite in the area, they also learn Lansdale used Veltro as a pawn during the Terra Grigia panic, and financed the development of the T-Abyss virus and its vaccine. Like Veltro, when the vaccine was created and in his hands, he killed the staff by releasing the BOWs they were working on, thus covering his tracks and strengthening his position in the FBC. Finding a sample of the prototype vaccine, Jill inoculates herself, adding this to the T-virus for things she's immune to. Just in time, the parasite outside smashes through the protective glass, flooding the lab with contaminated water, but an immunized Jill is able to freely swim away. With a passcode in hand, they are able to begin neutralizing the virus in the Zenobia, and are hailed by Lansdale, who congratulates them on figuring it out and cleansing the virus. He shows them the Semiramis blowing up and claims victory as they now hear the self-destruct sequence for the Zenobia has started. Chris swears to see him soon, and the duo hurry to escape the doomed ship. They are hailed by helicopter pilot Kirk, and along the way, Jill finds the wounded Parker, who reveals Jessica was Lansdale's mole, who shot him. As they move him, a walkway collapses underfoot, and while they struggle to hold on to Parker, he thanks them, but doesn't want to be a burden, and so lets go, plunging into the fires below. As they make it outside, Kirk circles around to meet them, but there's already a rescue chopper there. As they approach, the explosions on the ship knock them off their feet, and suddenly the first chopper is smashed under a massive tentacle. Emerging from the destroyed ship in ocean depths rises a leviathan whale-like monster, infected with numerous parasites called Malacotas. Kirk can't rescue them at this time, but assists in dropping off ammo and rocket launchers, as Chris and Jill attempt to kill their literally largest BOW yet. They stagger it long enough to be lifted away by Kirk as they mount heavier guns and send a rocket down its throat to finally destroy this oversized menace. Meanwhile, it turns out Parker survived the fall and is met by Raymond. He apologizes to Raymond for not trusting him when he was right all along, and helps to save Parker's life in return for once saving his. As Chris and Jill fly off, they're radioed by O'Brien, and Chris explains their situation but insists O'Brien come clean. O'Brien explains that 1 year ago, Lansdale used bioterrorist group Veltro to orchestrate an attack on Terra Grigia to show the world how much of a threat BOWs were and thus increase the FBC's funding and influence. Veltro's leader Jack Norman didn't like how Lansdale betrayed them too by exposing Veltro to T-Abyss for experimentation purposes, and swore revenge as he had recorded all of their dealings despite Lansdale doing them on the Queen Dido cruise ship. Raymond suspected Lansdale this whole time and worked with O'Brien to set up this whole act of reviving Veltro, all to put pressure on Lansdale. However, with Zenobia and Semiramis destroyed, there would be no evidence. Fortunately, Quint found the location of the hidden third ship Lansdale doomed the original Veltro to, the Queen Dido, and there lies their evidence. As Chris and Jill head over to Terra Grigia where the Queen Dido rests on the ocean floor, Lansdale storms into the BSAA HQ, seizing control and placing O'Brien under arrest for working with Veltro. Making their way inside the old ship, the duo find the blobs that surfaced on the shore were actually mutated corpses that floated up from this very ship the whole time. They find a recently killed FBC agent despite how old this wreckage is, who left a recording revealing Lansdale sent a team down here to recover evidence against him. They find another recording left by Jack Norman explaining he still holds the evidence and desire for revenge to expose Lansdale, even as the rest of Veltro has died or mutated, and now he too takes the T-Abyss in order to prolong himself. Deep within the ship, they are surprised to still find Jack Norman alive, but quite mad, as he drops the evidence needed to incriminate Lansdale. Jill grabs it, but Norman stops them, thinking them to be agents of Lansdale. Drinking an entire vial of T-Abyss, Norman now mutates into the ultimate Abyss monster, a tyrant-like foe with super speed and strength, able to leave illusions of himself in the minds of others, and like Rachel or the comm officer, able to speak normally. As the duo ends the true leader of Veltro and betrayed instigator of the Terra Grigia panic, they review his evidence and broadcast it publicly, showing Lansdale supplying Norman with the virus and a means to deliver it for the attack. Fully exposed, O'Brien also produces the T-Abyss viral they found on the beach Lansdale had sectioned off. Lansdale explains that this was all for the greater good, as without a clear and present danger, the ignorant public would claim to not need organizations like the FBC or BSAA. Not commenting on that, O'Brien instead relieves Lansdale of his authority and places him under arrest. As the game ends, the sun rises on a new day as the FBC is dissolved and its resources shifted to the BSAA. It turns out Keith and Quint survived the airbase bombing, and Keith would become the leader of the East Africa BSAA branch, though Quint refused any promotion, still working in R&D for the BSAA. Parker was found and rescued, healing up and returning as a special ops agent for the BSAA. O'Brien assumed responsibility for his actions and resigned as head of BSAA, but remains as an advisor who also writes novels from his home. Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine would soon become lost in another nightmare, as events lead right into Resident Evil 5. Finally, as it turns out, both Jessica and Raymond were triple agents actually working with each other and pretending to be FBC and BSAA spies working for Lansdale. In truth, they were really working to secure a sample of the T-Abyss virus for their real employer, Tricell, another conglomerate pharmaceutical company that ironically co-funded the BSAA. Resident Evil Revelations has enjoyed the success of selling over 2 million copies worldwide.